Okay. Let's see. Back down a bit. All right. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, Israel. Welcome to our channel. I am your host, Kadar, and this is Sabbath Moment. First and foremost, I'd like to give thanks and praise to the Most High, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, for the Sabbath day. This particular segment is a true Heritage Ministries production. And we're going to go into a very interesting lesson today for this, time period. You know, right now we're at the time where in our captivity, our rulers are requiring us to what? Pay our taxes. That's right. Tax season is about to come to a closing, you know, with different deadlines and things of that nature. But we're going to go into an understanding of the Bible about taxes. One of the reasons why we decided to touch on this issue is because right now, at this present time, our captors are making a lot of different policies and changes when it comes to taxes. Okay? In other words, back in our Israelite time, taxes were known as tributes. So here, in our captivity, we've been required to pay tribute or taxes. But the changes that's about to come is not something that we can go into on this channel right now because we don't want no censorship violation. But we're going to go into the Bible during the time of Christ Yeshua and also during the time of Moses in the wilderness. So this understanding is going to be a two-part understanding during this Sabbath moment. Okay? So we're going to go into part 1, and then after that we're going to have part 2. Okay? Now, part 1 is called, let me bring it up, Rendering Tribute in Captivity. What is Caesar? Rendering tribute in captivity. What belongs to Caesar? The reason I mentioned that is Caesar is because during the time of Christ and the disciples, right, they were under the Roman occupation. And during the Roman occupation, unfortunately, Israel was required to pay a tribute, as they call a tax, to the Romans. So we're going to go to a few precepts and scriptures at this moment. Okay, so please bear with me. I want you all to get your Bibles, and when we go into the next scripture, we're going to start with, Mashiach in the temple. Okay? Matthew 21:23. 23 says, "And when he was to come into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came unto him as he was teaching, and said, By what authority doest thou these things? And who gave thee this authority?" Now, let me set the stage. Yeshua Christ is inside the temple teaching in maybe like a hall or a room where he have multiple students. Now, he's allowed to teach because Christ is a rabbi, a teacher, as we may call it today, or as it was translated today. But when you go back into during the time of the Romans, a teacher, a rabbi, was considered a lawyer or judge. Okay? Yes. Christ had the position to teach because he was some form of judge. I know not a lot of people go into it because they'll say, oh, Jesus Christ was a carpenter. No, he was more than that. Okay? We're going to go into that. All right? But Christ was inside the temple teaching. Now, when they came to him and said, what authority do you have in teaching what? The doctrine that he was teaching. Okay? What Christ was teaching was not falling in line with the Pharisees and the Sadducees who came, and the chief priests who came to question him on what he was teaching. Almost like you're in a school and there's a teacher and the principal walks by and he hears what the teacher is teaching the kids, and they say, wait a minute, this is not part of our teaching syllabus. The teachers look like you're going off. So that's what was happening in time of Christ. So let's go a little bit further into it. All right. We're going to read on. Let me just close that. Next verse. Matthew 21, 24, 25. And Yeshua answered and said unto them, I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I in likewise will tell you by what authority do these things. The baptism of John, whence was it? From heaven or of man? And they reasoned with themselves, saying, well, if we shall say from heaven, he will say unto us, why did ye not believe in him? Verse 26. But if we shall say of men, we fear the people, for all hold John as a prophet. And they answered Yeshua and said, we cannot tell. And he said unto them, neither tell I you by what authority I do these things. So we see that they pose a question to Yeshua, what authority you have teaching this doctrine? But Christ said, okay, I will answer you, but if you answer me this question, the baptism of John the Baptist, where was it from? Was it from heaven or was it of man? And they thought to themselves, well, if they say from heaven, they feel like Christ would say, well, why didn't you believe in him? If they say it's from man, then they're afraid that people might see him as a prophet and move John the Baptist's direction. So they really couldn't answer that question. But Christ knew the answer. That's why he asked that question. And he knew that they didn't know the answer to that question. So when they couldn't answer the question, that's when Christ said, you know what? Since you can't answer my question, then I can't answer your question. All right? That's what just happened here. Let's continue. Let's jump to Matthew 22, verse 15, 16. Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, okay, now the Herodians were Herod, King Herod, who was Idumean, from Idumea, Edomite, who was, how can I say it, perpetrating as a king of Israel. He had his servants, the Hydorians, the Herodians, and with the priest disciples. And they were trying to figure out how could they entangle Christ, right? Okay. Verse 16, and they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of man. Verse 17, tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? So now they're trying to entangle Christ with this question now. Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar? All right. Why would they ask Christ that question? Okay. Let me read on. Verse 18. But Yeshua perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he said unto them, who is this image on this superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar. Then said unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things of Caesar. Render unto the things which are Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's. So they brought the penny, as Christ asked, and on the penny they had a picture of Caesar. So Christ said, Who image is this? They said, Well, it's Caesar's. Christ said, Well, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give unto God what is God. So, now we're going to go more details into this understanding of what Christ meant, give unto Caesar what is Caesar. And part 2 is give unto God what is God. And we're going to go into what is God's in part 2. But right now in this first part, we're going to go into what is Caesar. What is Caesar? The tribute. Israel had to give a tribute to the Roman Empire, the Roman occupation during that time. Okay? We're going to go and find out who was collecting these tributes. Who were the tax collectors, basically. Okay? Because Israel were being forced to pay taxes onto a nation that were occupying them. Okay? So they had their season. So the Shai says, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Okay, so now we're going to find out how did we render unto Caesar, and how did Israel render unto God. That's going to be in part 2. Let's jump on to Proverbs for a moment. Proverbs 4 and 7. It says, Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go and try to get understanding of rendering into Caesar what is Caesar's. We'll go to the Book of Ezra, chapter 4, verse 20. And it says, There have been mighty kings also over Jerusalem, which have ruled over all countries beyond the river, and tolls, tributes, and custom was paid unto them. So Ezra is speaking of all the different captivities that we've been under during the time of our forefathers, that Israel were forced to give a tribute to the other nations. Okay? When Israel gave tribute to the other nations that took them in captivity, it made the other nations fat, and it strengthened their economic system. And that was one of our curses. So Ezra is speaking of the taxes, which is what you call tributes, that was given on to the other nations that occupied Israel. Okay? Tribute. Tribute, as I just said, is a form of tax. All right? During those times, it was called a tribute. During our time, we call it taxes. All right? Now, let's go. We're going to go into Luke 2, 1 through 3. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augusta that all the world should be taxed. So at that time, Caesar was the Roman Empire, with Caesar was controlling all the province throughout the whole eastern region. Okay? That's what they used to call the world. Alright? Verse 2. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria, and all went to be taxed, everyone into his own city. So this is even during the Assyrian captivity, about maybe 500 years before this time, that Israel was being was required to pay a tax to the Assyrians. Okay. We'll continue. Luke 2, verse 46. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, into the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house of the lineage of David. Now, Joseph was in Nazareth in the country of Galilee. Galilee was a city, a country in the lot of Naphtali, which is about a Sabbath journey to Jerusalem and to Judah. So at that time, Joseph and Mary were residents of Naphtali in the country of Galilee in the town of Nazareth. Okay, just setting the picture there. So now that they have to pay a tax, Joseph, being a Judite from the tribe of Judah, had to go all the way to Judea to pay his tax. And his wife Mary had to accompany him. Okay? Verse 5. To be taxed with Mary his spouse, wife being great with child. And it was so, that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. So now, at this time, when Israel was required to go to their prospective tribe regions to pay their tax or their tribute to the Romans, right? Mary was with child. Christ was currently in her womb, and she was about to have Christ during that time of that tax season. Okay? Now, you see, as today is when you're married, the husband and wife, you file your tax as a joint. Okay? And that was the same time in Israel. When they filed, Joseph was paying the tax for who? For him and his wife Mary and the whole family. This is nothing new under the sun. Okay? A lot of what we're seeing today was done before, during the time of Israel. Okay? Let us read on. Now, here's a question. Who were the tax collectors? Who were collecting the tax when Israel had to pay their tribute to Caesar? Okay? The Romans wasn't coming down and collecting it from all Israelite citizens. There was the middlemen between the Romans and the Israelites that was in the inhabitants of who habitated in Israel during the time of the Romans. So the question is, who were the tax collectors? So we're going to go into that. Let's go to Luke 18 from verse 9 to 10. And he spake this parable unto a certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous, and despised others. This is a parable from Christ. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a Republican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. So Christ is telling a parable, right, about how Pharisees, and the parables are true events that happen. Pharisees like to go to the temple and pray and talk about all the great things they have done with their high-minded self, and accuse publicans as being what? Unjust, extortioners, adulterers, just wicked men, right? So that's the parable. All right, let's continue. Verse 12. I fast twice in a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. Verse 13. And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So the publican is being conflicted. He's asking for mercy. He has his head down. He's prostrated himself while praying to the Most High. Whereas the Pharisees were so high-minded and talking about the tithes he gave and all the righteous thing that he done, right? But accused the publican as being extortionate and unjust. And here you have the publican prostrating himself and asking for mercy. Okay? So there's two things going on in this parable. So my question is, what was the publican's transgression? Why did he consider himself a sinner? What sort of crimes that the publican has been committing? Let's go into it. Let's jump into Luke 3, 12 to 13. Then came also publicans to be baptized, and said unto him, Master, what shall we do? So, at this point now, this is John the Baptist baptizing. So the publicans came to be baptized. And they asked John the Baptist, what shall we do? When you go to Luke 3. All right. Verse 13 said, and he said unto them, exact no more than that which appointed to you. So John the Baptist says, do not take more than what you have been taking. Okay? Basically, John is showing them the sins that they had committed as publicans, which were extortioners. They extorted people for tax. Users. They charged people usury. They were unjust. They were adulterers. There was all of that as publicans. Okay? That was the parable that Christ was given. So then we go John the Baptist baptism. Publicans came and said, what should I do in order to get baptized and get that salvation? And John told them exactly. Don't be extortioners no more. Don't be users. Right? Okay. So this is one thing we noticed. One of the sins we know that the publicans were struggling with. Alright? Alright. We're gonna go into the book of Matthew 9. And this one right here, we're gonna go we're gonna deal with the relationships now between Yeshua Mashiach and the publicans. Okay? Who were the extortioners, the users, the adulterers, who were the sinners. Right? According to the Pharisees in that parable. So now we're gonna go into Christ's relationship with them. Matthew 9, 10 to 9 to 10. This is Matthew's account. Okay? This is from the book of Matthew, his account. And as Josiah passed forth from thence, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom. And he said unto him, follow me. And he arose and followed him. And it came to pass, as Yeshua sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and the disciples. Now, Yeshua went, and he went into the receipt of custom. Receipt of custom must have been a place of money changing, or maybe a bank or an office that deals with the financial system. So Matthew obviously was dealing with finance. So he told Matthew, follow him. Matthew got up and they went someplace to eat dinner, and there were Pharisees and Sadducees amongst this feast that they went into. All right? This is where we are in this account. Let's continue. We're going to go verse 11. This is still Matthew. Verse 11. Let me just make sure. This is Matthew chapter 9, verse 11. And when the Pharisees saw it, and they said unto his disciples, why eateth your master with publicans and sinners? So now, here we go again. The Pharisees are accusing publicans as sinners. Right? Just the same way that Christ spoke of his parables. But when Yeshua heard that, this is verse 12, he said unto them, they that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. But go ye and learn what that meaneth, and I will have mercy and not sacrifice, for I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So now Christ is telling her, listen, you Pharisees may be righteous, so I have not called you. But I'm here with the Republicans who are the sinners, who are asking for mercy. All right? Just like what we read in the parable. So it seems like there's a division amongst the Pharisees and the publicans. Where the Pharisees accused the publicans of being sinners. All right? Okay, so that was Matthew's account. Now we're going to go into Mark's, the book of Mark account of the same scenario. All right, this is Mark chapter 2, verse 14-15. And he passed by and he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of custom, and said unto him, follow me. And he arose and followed him. Okay, we just read in the book of Matthew that Christ went to receive custom and he came across Matthew. But now in the book of Mark, it said that Levi, the son of Alphaeus. So my question is, are they the same person or are they not? Because it mentioned Levi, the son of Alphaeus in Mark's account. Let's continue reading. Verse 15, and it came to pass that as Yeshua sat at meat in the house, many publicans and sinners sat also together with Yeshua and the disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. Verse 16, and when the scribes and the Pharisees saw him eat with publicans and sinners, they said unto his disciples, how is it that he eateth and drinketh with publicans and sinners? So this is the same situation we just read in the book of Matthew. But this time, it went into who was at the dinner table. There was with Levi, the son of Alphaeus, and the Pharisees. Let's go back into it. The scribes and the Pharisees was there with Christ and the disciples, and saw him eat with publicans and sinners. If you go back to the same thing, Mark 14, verse 15, and it came to pass that Yeshua sat at meat in his house. So, when Christ went to sit and eat, he was at Levi, the son of Alphaeus' house. But at the house were scribes and Pharisees with Yeshua Christ and the disciples. Right after he went to the office of money exchange and said to follow me. But in the book of Matthew, it says Matthew was at the receipt of custom, the money exchange, and he said follow me, and then went to meat. So again, my question is this the same person? Could Matthew be Levi according to the account of Mark, the son of Alphaeus? All right, let's go more into it. Mark 2:16, and when the scribes and the Pharisees saw him eat with publicans and sinners, they say unto his disciples, how is it that he eateth and drinketh with publicans and sinners? Now, we're going to go into Luke's account. We just went into Matthew's account, where it says that Christ came across Matthew and said to follow me. Then we went to Mark's account, when he went to Levi, the son of Alphaeus, and said to follow me, and went to his house to feast and eat dinner, and scribes and Pharisees was there amongst disciples. Now we're going to go into what Luke says around this whole situation. We'll go to the book Luke chapter 5, verse 27-29. And after these things, he went forth, and he saw a publican named Levi sitting at the receipt of custom, and he said unto him, Follow me. Now in the book of Luke, it said he went to the receipt of custom and saw the publican Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of custom. Just the same way we read in the book of Matthew, where he saw Matthew. Right? All right. Let's continue. Verse 28. And he left all, rose up, and followed him. And Levi, the son of Alphaeus, made him a great feast in his own house. And there was a great company of publicans and others that sat down with them. So in Luke's account, Christ went to Levi, the son of Alphaeus, went to his house, his big house, where he had many other publicans and other many companies that was with him, and the disciples, and then you will find, and with the scribes and the Pharisees. Okay? So we know that Levi, the son of Alphaeus, was a publican, a money changer, the same as Matthew when we go book of Matthew. All right? Let's continue. Luke 5:30. But there were scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, saying, Why do ye eat and drink with publicans and sinners? And Yeshua answered and said unto them, They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. This is the same account that we read in the book of Matthew. They said, when they was in the book of Matthew, the Pharisees said, Why do your master sit and eat with sinners? Who were what? The extortioners, the adulterers, the usurers, the unjust, the publicans, the tax collectors. They were considered to be the unjust, the usurers, the extortioners. Now the question was, is Matthew the same person in these other accounts as Levi, the son of Alphaeus? You got it. Yes. All three accounts talking about the Levi was Matthew, who had a big house, okay, who had other publicans, which was his, co-workers, his associates that came to his big house. And you had some Pharisees and scribes at Matthew, the Levi, the son of Alphaeus' house, with Yeshua Mashiach and his disciples. All many people were who? In Matthew's big house, having dinner, feasting. But then the Pharisees and scribes said, man, what is Yeshua and disciples? What are you guys doing here amongst these sinners? If the publicans are such sinners and Christ is with them, why the Pharisees and scribes there at Levi's, the publican's house? That means that you're also part of their sins too. But Christ was there for a particular purpose. Okay? So now we understand that the publicans were, the publican Matthew was a publican. He was a money changer. He was a tax collector. Okay? He was a tax collector. All right? So Christ with them. Now, we see how today we have Jackson Hewitt, we have H&R Blocks, we have different what you call tax collectors in our community. Okay? And these are the guys that we will call publicans during our time. All right? The little financial guys who every tax season you go into their office and, they tell you all kinds of ways how you could get back money, more buck for your money. And a lot of them too are extortioners, especially when you have a lot of single women that goes to these tax collectors, and they tell them different ways how they could get more money for their buck, depending how many children they have, or if they could get somebody, their cousin's child, and put on the taxes and everything like that. Yep, these are the publicans. These are the extortionists. And a lot of them are adulterers. They like to take advantage of a lot of the single women in, the poor community, our community. But I'm not going to go into details about that. But they are the publicans. Okay, the users, the extortioners. But unfortunately, we in captivity, we have to go to them to file our taxes because what? We don't have that understanding of it ourselves. We're very ignorant to the understanding of taxes and financial records. So now we rely on the publicans in our neighborhoods, the tax collectors or these little tax offices to file our taxes because of what? Of our ignorance. Yeah, there's turbo taxes and everything, but a lot of us still don't like to mess with it because it could be a little bit confusing, right? And you want to make sure you're doing everything right. But I want to move on. So, our present day IRS tax collectors are known as publicans during the time of Christ and the disciples. Okay? Now, we're going to go into the chief publican. Okay? Chief publican. This guy is like the IRS for the Romans. Okay? We're going to go into him. Luke 19, 1 and 9. And Yeshua entered and passed through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the Republicans, and he was rich. So Zacchaeus was the top G of all the publicans. His office was like the IRS. He overseed all the publicans to make sure that everyone has collected the tax from who needed to be taxed and who needed to give their tribute. So he was the chief publican. Okay? He was the chief priest. He was a Levi. Okay? Verse 2, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was a chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And that's another thing too. Most of the tax collectors were well off. All right? Those who was taking tribute for Caesar, the Romans, were well off. Luke 19, verse 3 to 4. And he sought to see Yeshua, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was a little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. So Zacchaeus, even though he was rich and well off, he was a little short man, short stature. Okay? Yeshua is walking amongst the crowd, and he don't know what Yeshua looked like. He can't see anything. So what he does, he climb up the sycamore tree so he could get a better glimpse of who Yeshua Mashiach was at that time. Verse 7. And when Yeshua came to the place, he looked up and he saw him. And he said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste, and he came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be a guest with a man that is a sinner. So even now with Zacchaeus, the chief top G of the publicans, the people murmured, why is Yeshua hanging out with this sinner? Even he had the reputation of being what? An extortioner, a user, an adulterer. Okay? But Yeshua Christ went to check them. And you see that Zacchaeus accepted Christ joyfully. Okay? All of those who Christ went to see, they accept him joyfully because they want to know who that man was. So Christ been to Matthew's house with other publicans, Matthew's big house, who's well off, and now he's about to break bread with Zacchaeus, who's also the top food chain dog of the publican's house. Okay. Now, okay, so this is Luke. I'm sorry, Luke. Tell you, it's Luke chapter 19, verse 8. You can't see it. Verse 8. Luke chapter 19, verse 8. And Zacchaeus stood, and he said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give unto the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. So now Zacchaeus is explaining, because he believed in Yeshua being the Mashiach, that he knows all things. Now he's explaining himself of the things that he's done. You know, his usury, extortioning people, saying that he gave back and repented. Every time he did a crime against people financially, he was managed to find a way to give it back. That's what he's saying to Yeshua Christ. Right? Let's read it again. Very interesting. 8 says, And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Verse 9, And Yeshua said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for so much as he also is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. So, Christ blessed him. Christ honored him and said salvation is coming to him in his house, because he repented a lot of his extortioning ways as a chief Republican. Okay? Some of them can't even help what they're doing when it comes to the financial order during the time of Israel, because they had to get their tribute from all the Israelite residents, and they have to give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And then for themselves too, they got a big house, okay, where they could feed many. They're very rich. So obviously some of that went to Caesar's, some of the taxes went on to them. But we're going to go into the wilderness to show you that it is rightful so for it to go to them. But we're also going to see that the Republicans were not doing what they were needed to do. That's what made them sinners. Okay? With the funds that they accumulated. A lot of them pocketed the money instead of helping Israel during that time of Christ. Okay, so this is the end of our first part segment. All right, in just a moment we're gonna bring up part 2. We're gonna go into rendering tribute unto God. What is God in the wilderness? All right, so watch the next part. Very interesting. Rendering tribute unto the God, or what is God's, part 2. In the wilderness. Okay, so now we all know that the publicans were the tax collectors rendering unto Caesar. So when the Pharisees came to Christ and asked, is it fair to give tribute to Caesar? They were questioning Christ about whether he'd been paying taxes. Okay, they questioned Christ about that. But in part 2, we're going to go into details about that. All right? So, just hang in there for part 2. I'd like to give a shout out, all praises to the Heritage of Jacob's Church, located at 2801 Church Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11226. Sabbath day, 3:30 p.m. to sundown. Okay, for those of you in the Brooklyn area, if you're looking for a place to gather and get a more understanding of the Bible, you could come and fellowship with us. So we'll be going on later on and doing a feast. Today is a feast, as they call a double Shabbat. So hope to see some of you out there. Okay, now look out for part 2. I'd like to say give thanks and shalom.